Good afternoon. Welcome, everyone. Thank you for joining us today to discuss the book, We Are the Change We Seek, Advancing Racial Justice in Early Care and Education. My name is Emily, and on behalf of the publisher, Teachers College Press, we're thrilled so many of you have taken time out of your day to be with us here this afternoon. We're excited, of course, to have the four co-authors of this important work here with us today. They will introduce the book and themselves in greater detail in just a few moments, but let me briefly welcome Iheoma Iruka of the University of North Carolina at Chapel Hill, Tonia Durden of Georgia State University, Kerry-Ann Escayg of the University of Nebraska, Omaha, and Stephanie M. Curenton of Boston University. Thank you all for sharing your time and expertise and wisdom with us this afternoon, and I think I speak for many in the audience when I say we're eager to hear about your work. Some minor housekeeping. We are recording, and we will distribute that recording via email in a few days' time. So please share it with anyone you think would be interested in today's program. There is a discount of 20% off the book available to attendees of today's webinar. I'll drop the details of that in the chat panel, so please look there and make sure to take advantage of that deal while it lasts. We'll end today with a Q&A, so please put your questions in the chat and our panelists will do their best to get to those at the end of the hour. And finally, if you find today's program valuable, please check us out, Teachers College Press at tcpress.com. We have lots of resources for the early care and education community, and we publish extensively on equity and justice issues at every level of education, from early childhood to adult ed. Follow us on social media, consider joining our mailing list to hear about new books, sales, and future webinars. I'll put the link to our newsletter subscription in the chat as well, so please join us, tcpress.com. And with that, I'll hand it over to the authors.
Thank you so much, Emily. Greetings, everybody in Zoom land. We are so thrilled that you have taken time to join us today. We're so glad you are here. So yes, and we see all the hellos in the chat, and we're going to take a moment to introduce ourselves. But let me pop in our slides so that we can be ready to rock and roll with you, and also be able to say hello to all the authors. But before we really introduce the authors, let's first just take a moment to, just honor native land, right? We want to acknowledge that we live, work, and build our family's economic wealth on various tribes that were taken through colonization and attempted eradication by white settlers. And so we want to make sure that we acknowledge that and recognize their sovereignty in many ways. We also want to honor Black bodies. We know that many parts of the U.S. Was built by enslaved Africans and their enslaved descendants. And only within the past generation, our generation actually here in this room, the authors, we afforded full rights as humans. And so again, I want to acknowledge the price and the wealth that has been generated off of Black bodies and continues to be there. And just to quickly give you just what our goal for this webinar is going to be before we introduce the authors, is we want to sort of give your journey of what it took to make the book a little bit, the goals of We Are the Change We Seek, right? What are the goals of this book? And then the content of the book and how to use it. And we'll have a series of sort of conversations that I will moderate. And of course, we want you to get ready for a lively Q&A. So please get your questions ready. Use the chat box as well to really engage with me as the moderator for this work, for this panel, I should say, but also and with each other as well. All right, to really kick it off, I want to make sure I say I'm Iheoma Iruka. My friends are she, her, hers. And I'm here at UNC Chapel Hill. I want to give space now to Tonia to introduce herself and say hello.
Hello, hello. I am Tonia Durden. I'm at Georgia State, clinical professor and also birth to five program coordinator. And I am also the wife of Frederick and the mother of Isaiah, Frederick, and Zoe, all of whom really guides the work that I do. As with many of us, we live this work, we are this work. And so we have both personal and professional connections to this work. So thank you all for coming.
Kerry-Ann, want to jump off?
Sure. Hi, everyone. Welcome. My name is Kerry-Ann Escayg. I'm at University of Nebraska, Omaha, and my research looks at children's racial identity development and anti-racism in ECE.
And hello, I'm Stephanie Curenton. I'm a professor at Boston University. I also run a small nonprofit called Early Learning Access. I love this field. I have been in the early childhood field since I was in my early 20s, and I would not ever want to study or do any work anywhere else. And I'm just pleased to be here in this space to talk with you all.
You anywhere else? Okay, all right. If you say so, Stephanie. Okay. That's we're gonna go to Jamaica and build a house. But anywho, let's just kick it off, right? We're gonna, this is we're family here. Obviously, you have probably seen us, the four of us, this quartet before with our first book. So we just thought a little bit of journey, just to give you a little bit of sort of our how we come to be to this book uh, that we're going to talk about today. So really, I'll just quickly say it's been almost a decade of over a little bit over a decade since a few of us have come together. And I would just say, from my point of view, Stephanie and I had a phone call. It led to a book that we wrote in 2013. It's, there's a whole backstory to that. And then really it was myself, Stephanie, and Tanya. Then Nebraska was a central part in our journey, our collective quartet journey. Nebraska also, obviously, Kerry-Ann is also at the University of Nebraska at Omaha. So there's a Nebraska, for some weird reason, the middle of the country is where us, Black diasporic individuals somehow came together in some fashion or another. But even through that work, our connection in Nebraska and beyond, it really, our sisterhood then really came forward with the book Don't Look Away, that came out in 2020, which I assume many of you may know about. But so anything you guys want to say about this journey before I just move over to the goals of this current book? Anything you want to add to that?
I would say, I'm sorry, go ahead, Stephanie.
Oh, I was just going to say, I was so glad to see this when you chronicled it the way that you did. I was like, wow, these were the touch points that brought us together. So thank you for bringing this up, lifting it up for us.
Yeah, it was a beautiful journey, a long journey, and also professional journey. As you mentioned, we had some babies along the way. We supported one another along the way. We've had some career changes, career movements along the way. And so with all of these life changes that we've had, we've also grown in our trajectory and our scholarship as well, from going from anti-bias to now anti-racist. It's just saying the name, calling it for what it is. And so I think that that's also really remarkable, is that we've grown together as sisters, and we've also grown together in our maturity, I think, in this topic as well.
Anything you want to add, Kerry-Ann?
No, I think you guys pretty much covered it there.
All right. So really just, high level, just the goals of the book was really to deliver on the promise of high quality education for all children. That's what we were trying to make sure was evident in the book. But really, and Stephanie, Tanya, and Kerry-Ann really speak to this beautifully, right? Provide inspiration really for the early childhood field, the workforce, the staff, educators, to really feel seen, loved, heard, to be inspired that the work that they do for our children, our families, and communities are recognized fully, but also to provide practical tools and resources and other what we call heart shapers and brain builders. But more importantly, for those who have gotten a book, if you have, thank you. If not, we hope this webinar will help you sort of lean into it and get access to it. Is we want to sort of bring forward what we call CRABAR, which is culture responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist practices, to make it visible, but also visceral, right? That is not just about doing it just because you think you have to do, but really living it in the classroom, in schools, in your life, in your community, and just the way you move and operate. And so we're trying to make sort of that whole culture responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist really part of who you are, and really shape that. And I would say in particular with this book, we want to connect history to current events, right? We talk a lot about just anti-Blackness in the book, and obviously given what's happening with our Haitian brothers and sisters in Ohio, right? You can see some of those touch points even there. We want to support self-inquiry because we know that a book is what it is. A book is, how you use it, what matters. And so trying to encourage a shift in mindset, offer guidance for creating affirming and joyful spaces. But we really want it to be a tool to really galvanize people, educators, leaders, to really move forward in sort of a joyful, anti-bias, anti-racist place, right? And prepare for what we call the white backlash. And so we hope that some of this has come through for those who have read the book, and hopefully for those who have not, it will come through for you. Kerry-Ann, Tonia, Stephanie, anything in terms of like the high level, in terms of when you think about the goals of the book, anything you want to add to sort of this list?
I would just add a lot of thought leadership and a lot of thinking that we had around the title was really centered on oftentimes in this work, we're always looking for others, right? And we're always saying, okay, well, if only policy did this, or only if directors did this, or only if researchers did this, or teacher educators did this, or teachers did this, or families or communities. And so we really wanted to center the conversation of, if we want to really change and create thriving, joyful, equitable spaces for children, particularly for those from marginalized spaces and Black and Brown children, then we are the ones that have to evoke that change. So we have to look and see how we have, the altitude and the aptitude in order to really make the change. And that was really the catalyst for the title, is saying, we have everything that we need in order to make the change that we want to see. So we just need, as Mbapa Asa Hillier would say, do we have the will to make that change?
Yes, and I can speak to where we are today, right? We are actually, this is National Voter Registration Week. So again, we are the change we seek, right? It does not come to you, you actually must activate it. So beautifully said. Any others around goals of the book you want to share?
What I always just want to say is to give a shout out to us, as authors, is that we are all people who are interested in like research, policy, and practice. And I feel as though what makes me so proud every time we create a book is how we really weave those three things together in a meaningful way for people, so that these books become useful to people, right? And so I think that is something that is, so such to be proud of. And there you will find, when you read the book, that every concept that we lay out, we are then answering that so what question about what you can do then in your real life to make a change.
I love that you said that too, Stephanie. Go ahead, Kerry-Ann.
No, I was just going to say, similar to both Tonia's and Stephanie's point, is that the spirit of this book is sustained by a pedagogy of hope. We believe in the work. We believe in our collective abilities to dismantle racism. So we invite you as the reader to see yourself in that work as well, because anti-racist work, whether in ECE classrooms or in the larger society, is community oriented. So with those elements, with those threads in the books, we hope that you see yourselves represented too.
Lovely. So just a couple of book features, and we think about what is going to be most important, particularly for educators. So we have things like the Educator's Corner, and with all the chapters, they really center educators' voices and experiences. We have the now what, right? So the question like, now what, right? To Stephanie's points, right, is sort of the summary of each of the chapter that boils down the key points of the section. And it's also your call of action. What do you do with now all this information? We have reflection activities are placed throughout the book to allow readers to take a break, whether it's a journal, whether it's kind of like to stop and think and pause. And so we really ask, readers to think about what are the things you could be doing, right, as you read the book. So it doesn't feel like it's a book you read and that's it, but really to actually activate and kind of work it with yourself, with others, with your colleagues, etc. And of course, as with our books, right, we have new tools, frameworks, resources. And of course, because we want to keep it short enough, we don't put everything in the book, but there are other references and resources there as well. And then just quickly, in terms of just the general, what was in the general content, right? We have the chapter starts with race in past, present, and future. So to really ground in where have we been, where are we, and where we're going. And you could see through the next sort of like chapters 2 to 5 in particular, but 2 to 6, I should say, we really try to go deep into CRABAR, culture responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist practices. We talk about that with practices. learning environment, assessment, the workforce, and then of course issues around practice and policy, right? So we really try to sort of give some really critical actionable pieces, give actually resources, right? Things you can actually do from assessment point of view, things you can look at in the environment to ensure that you're actually engaging in culturally responsive anti-bias, anti-racist practices. And of course, what are some of the things we can do policy-wise if we're trying to make sure all this connects across the board. Anything else you want to say about the content, just in terms of what's here? Just want to make sure. Okay, so I want to get to the questions. This is where you're going to hear from, Tanya, Stephanie, and Kerry-Ann. And because I get to moderate, I won't have to say much today. So this is the most talking I'm going to do today. But I want to just talk a couple of things. Like, we want you to don't skip sort of where we talk a lot about the author acknowledgements. That's where you get to know a little bit about us. Resources and references, and of course data tables, right? We're all academics in many ways or another, so there'll be data of some sort. So definitely don't skip some of those things that most people tend to skip, the front and the back. No, read the front for sure. Like, see who we are, who we're thinking, who we really give all our credit to. So I definitely encourage you to do that. And I'm just gonna do one favorite, number one, and I'm gonna actually kick off the questions. So I'm gonna skip a couple of things that we talked about. So I do want to make sure, when I think about the book, and there's a lot of favorites for me personally in the book, but the one thing I know for sure that I often come back to, just with the work that I do, whether with educators, with policymakers, is trying to connect the dots between our history, our policies, our practices, implicit bias, right? Trying to make sure that people understand how all this continues to sort of go in this big cycle, right? And so I actually, like, for me, one of my favorites is just this imagery that we actually were able to pull from the National Equity Project that really helps us to really understand how history plays a really, really important role in our policies that then create the disparities that we see, then they create and reify sort of who is privileged, that reifies all the biases and stereotypes that then goes back and create more policies that injure, harm, dehumanize. And so this is one of the things that I actually talk a lot about in a lot of my work. So I want to just sort of say, this is one of my favorites, but I want to sort of leave it there as I sort of now want to sort of talk with the other authors about related things. So really, we're going to jump to our first question, ladies. And of course, for those in Zoom land, again, feel free to chat with us. We'll be looking through the chat, share your questions. We'll be pulling out some questions there. We wanted to make it as inviting and also as conversational so that you can kind of see who we are, the book itself, but also feel free to ask additional questions that we are not talking about. So now, to start with Tanya, so think about this question we have here. Related to the content of the book, what are some things you have been doing for the past year? So tell us, what have you been? The book came out, when did the book come out? Last year, right? So what you've been doing since 2023, and now we're about to be almost done with 2024. What's been going on the past year for you?
Well, I've been continuing to raise amazing Black children, 4, 6, and 8, that has actually helped me to begin to actualize in a different type of role, this work with their teachers and helping them to see the Black brilliance of the children they have the privilege to teach and to cultivate and to help thrive and bring joy in the classroom. And so definitely this past year, I had kind of this new role of really being able to work hand in hand with local schools, particularly those that my children attend, so that I could really be more of a community advocate at the local level. Also, I am the board president of this really amazing organization called the National Association of Education of Young Children. Yeah. And so in that role, we have an amazing CEO, Michelle Kang, who really does support this work of equity. And so a part of what I've been doing this past year is really helping to support, the efforts of actualizing, advancing equity through our professional professional organization, and also being able to draw upon this work, right? We're the change that we seek work in how do we mobilize a whole field of professional educators, right? To really do all of the practices that we know help to create joyful, thriving spaces for Black and Brown children. As a little plug, a part of that is if you do come to our annual conference, you'll see these amazing authors as well as other contributors that are doing this work. Because a part of this past year, I have transitioned away from just to talk to seeking out people who are actually being the change, who are actually doing the work. Because with working with teachers, I need to give them examples, right? I need to tell them, hey, these are the ways in which you can navigate these structures that's very Eurocentric, that's very, self individualistic focus, and instead create these spaces that center children's voices and that allow them to demonstrate their knowledge, how they show up in the classroom. And so, to answer your question, for this past year, I've been seeking out, I've been going back actually to my roots. And my roots is really seeking out programs, teachers of excellence, and who's actually doing this work. So my whole presidential seminar at NACCE this year is going to be, how are you advancing equity, right? What are the ways that you are doing it? Not what you're talking about, not what you're thinking about, but what are you doing to advance this effort? I've also gone back to quote my roots and really looking at African-centered education again. And of course, we have a piece in there in our book about African-centered education as the framework. If you teach a Black child, you should know about African-centered education, pedagogical practices, ideology. And if you don't, then you need to look it up. We have some of our amazing master teachers who are African-centered in their thought and may not even realize that you are. And so I've kind of reclaimed that part of my identity and really looking forward to tapping into, again, the individuals who are doing diaspora literacy like Laura Boutte, that's really doing the work that's advancing equity.
Thank you. Yes, going back to the roots. You can only go up from there. How about you, Kerry-Ann? What you've been up to the past year or so?
I like this question because it reminds me of the Sankofa principle. You look back to move forward. All right. So with that said, when you love your work, all of us love what we do, right? And when you're passionate about justice, it always inspires you to do more and to be more. Over the last year, I've been refining how I conceptualize anti-racism in early childhood by paying specific attention to the elements of whiteness and how they manifest in early childhood settings, and the anti-racist pedagogies and curriculum and practices that are needed to undermine the expressions of whiteness. In a related vein and congruent with the anti-racist vision of centering children's voices, I'm also in the process of conducting a research study with Black children in Canada and the US on their perceptions of quote unquote quality, because we know that term has been critiqued, quality in early childhood settings, because in doing so, we gain a richer set of data that will help strengthen not only anti-racist education, but also pro-Black pedagogy, because there are certainly overlaps, conceptual similarities between anti-racist early years practices and pro-Black pedagogy. And finally, I'm also interested in exploring how white educators' social and emotional skills support anti-racist pedagogy. In fact, an article I recently wrote on this topic was published today. So yes. And it's very much practice-centered. So for each domain of social emotional skills, I have questions to support your anti-racist development and teaching. So if you're interested in learning more about that, send me an email and I will send you the link to the article.
Thank you. Make sure that means you have to drop your email over there. Just make sure people got your email, okay?
Yes.
Put me on your list. Can I get your autograph?
Yes. Stephanie, what you been up to or not been up to? Yes.
Right. So one of the things that I've been spending a lot of time doing this year is actually actualizing one of these tools that we talk about. So when you read the Don't Look Away book, when you read this book as well, we talk about an assessment tool that we created that is called assessing, I always mess it up, assessing classroom social cultural equity scale.
It's all right. You do the work.
Right. It's a great little measure. And it actually takes everything that we're saying about the anti-racist practices, Afrocentric approaches, being culturally responsive. It takes all of those things and it provides a tool in which we can evaluate classrooms in that way so that we can give feedback to educators, like concrete feedback about what they should do to learn and grow. So been spending a lot of time doing that. And then the other thing that I've done that is like just something that is so special for me is I have become a certified yoga instructor through an organization called Breathe for Change. And it is a yoga program that's specifically for teachers. So it's made for teachers and it's a trauma-informed approach to yoga. I've done yoga my whole life. I love it. It was a great part of my own personal healing from trauma. And when I saw this program, I thought, oh my goodness, I would love to be able to do this, to be able to share this with teachers and with children. And so I've been investing a lot of time in sort of engaging in that training, as well as learning about the program and really trying to think about what's the best way for us to sort of incorporate this into our research, right? Because we want to focus on healing, right? We're talking about sort of the racism, everything that we have to deal with, but we also want to be forward thinking in terms of healing. How can we learn? How can we grow? How can we heal, from these things? And I think that focusing using trauma-informed education practices and in having those trauma-informed interactions with other human beings, regardless of the age, I think will really put us on that pathway to that.
I keep forgetting you're a psychologist. I keep forgetting. Psychologist.
Psychologist.
I am a proud psychologist.
I keep forgetting. That was beautiful.
So it's interesting, right? So like, for example, Tanya, you mentioned going back to your roots and as one of the things you've been doing. And of course, Kerry-Ann, you talked about sort of like really pushing on the idea of whiteness. And then really for you, Stephanie, thinking about obviously access, but trauma-informed sort of care and thinking about sort of the things you all have been doing this past year. Do you feel like that's reflected in the book, or do you feel like that's in some areas that needs to be expanded on more, either in the book or other work that you're doing?
I think we need a new book. I think our next book should be about like trauma and, yoga and like, healing and meditation for children. I think that's the next one.
Yeah. And I would advocate, sorry, go ahead, Tonia.
No, you're fine. Go ahead.
I was saying I would advocate for that book. We have an entire section devoted to children's voices.
That's what I'm going to say. We got to have it for, healing for the community, the family, teachers, and children. Drop them off.
So stay tuned.
And I'm going to highlight, lift up for us too, and play. What you'll notice all of our books is that we always talk about play and the importance of play. It's a whole section in Don't Look Away book. We talk about it here too. And play is also part of sort of this healing and this growth and just having a moment to relax and imagine, right? Those are the kind of spaces we want to create for children.
And to that point, Stephanie, I did a presentation this past summer entitled Righting Historical Wrongs, Why Black Children Deserved a Pro-Black Play-Based Pedagogy. So we can put all of that in the book too.
Okay.
Yeah. Amen. Okay. See, so basically somebody put in the chat. So we have about 3 to 4 books each. Thank you all for that. So going to question number 2. What is one part of this book, right? We Are the Change We Seek, you would advise people to read and why? So I'm going to ask Kerry-Ann to kick us off.
Okay, sure. I think it depends on a number of factors, one of which is the reader's knowledge of racism, and not referring only to contemporary realities, but the foundational ideologies, practices and policies that have shaped the racist social order of the United States, because you cannot engage in anti-racist work without having that foundational knowledge base. However, if the reader possess such knowledge, the next chapter I think is absolutely critical. And I say this because I've conducted research with early childhood educators. And one thing that I've discovered is that they often conflate anti-bias with anti-racism. And this is not to lay any blame on the educators, but rather to highlight how prominent anti-bias is in the early childhood landscape. So I would say if you're well aware of racism, contemporary and past roots and realities, then you should start on that chapter, because we make it quite explicit the distinctions between culturally relevant, anti-bias, and anti-racism, and what that means for your classroom practice.
Stephanie?
So I'm just gonna say, now you all know me better than that. And my answer is like, you need to read the whole book. And if my children were here, they would tell you, she's gonna say, you need to read the whole book. There's no skipping around. You need to read it from front to cover, because there are things that are woven intentionally all throughout the book. So read the whole thing.
You heard Dr. Curenton. Dr. Durden.
I agree. I would say read the whole book. It definitely builds upon one another. I think that if I had to pick out, well, there's two pieces I would pick out. So throughout the book, we were very intentional about putting vignettes, like stories, like to actually put examples of this is a child and this is a situation. So definitely really imagine that these are actual scenarios, right? So the scenarios are very powerful because they are a thing. We got to call the thing a thing, right? And then also, I would also really look at chapter 5, or the chapter that talks about the workforce. I think we have some reconciliation to do. And so it's important to know the history of our early childhood workforce, and also the challenges we have just within our workforce as it relates to racism, leadership, access, et cetera, compensation. And so if I was to really highlight one chapter, because that's a big part of the work that I do, and the struggle is real, real. I teach teachers who are experiencing some of the same hardships that the children they teach, from housing insecurity to food insecurity, and of course, low wages. They are skilled, they're going on to get advanced degrees, but in many cases, because, they are Black women, they don't have the same access, as to financial resources, to an elevated career, because they are Black women, and that's a problem. And so I do encourage you to think about ways in which, even if you are doing this work at the classroom level, how can you also advocate as a profession that we have equity even within our profession?
So Tonia, now I'm gonna pump the brakes real quick. I'm gonna say what people may be thinking, right? But this is what I'm thinking, right? And I champion and plus one, plus two, what you said around the importance of the workforce. So how do we sort of consolidate or really think through that? We know that the early childhood workforce dehumanizes, underpays the workforce at large, but it's worse for Black women, right? Even when they get education, like we have the data that substantiate that even when they get the degree that we have access to get, that they're still very much underpaid. They're not provided with leadership opportunities. And now they're taking basically money out of their pockets, right, to take care of us all, right, so we go to work. So how do we sort of what do we do with that? Like, I mean, and this is to you because you mentioned it, but I wonder also for others, right, that we want to see our babies also see those who look like them in front of the classroom and leaders. But how do we sort of address the issues that we are literally leading them into a career, if that's what it is, right? That is low pay, low wage, low value, and then you have debt and all these other things, and you can't even afford a house. So how do we sort of how do we deal with that?
Well, first you read a book and you read a chapter, because it tells us first, because knowledge is key, for us to know that the very thing that we're trying to fight against, we're doing it, with our own colleagues that are right next door, who are Black, who are brown, who are indigenous. And so I think that's what we do, is we acknowledge it, and then we reconcile it and we address it and we become that change. A part of, and actually my dear friend and colleague is on the webinar, Dr. Stacy French Lee. That's a part of what we do, because again, 95% of the teachers that we teach are Black women. And so we have seen it over and over again. And so we champion to have, external funding so that we could eliminate barriers, because we know, and we've seen it because of the project that we have, that the quality of life, just from getting that degree, the quality of life and the advancement for these Black women was significant once they got their 4-year degree. But we had to push for that. We had to push for it. We had to fight for it. And we had to seek lots of external resources in order to make that happen. And so that's just one example of ways in which to say, you know what, we're part of the problem. So Stacy and I were like, we're part of the problem. We see our students, we have a whole platform of Black teachers that we serve that are amazing, but because of this financial burden, or because of this lack of access and all these barriers to getting, this degree or these credentials that will help them to, and I'm talking about going from $17 an hour to making it upwards of $80,000 with benefits. So just imagine, right? Just imagine the life trajectory that has happened just from getting, that 4-year degree and the access that they have. And so I think, again, going back to our title, we are the change that we see. So we were becoming a part of the problem because we saw this over and over and over again, that we had a whole population that were willing, that were engaged, but because of the isms of our institution, they were not able, to really filter into our workforce. And then another issue, not all my issues.
Okay.
They do get into leadership, once they do get into these spaces, we still have the issue with our programs, our curriculum, as well as our policies that do not reflect who they are and the children that they teach. It's still very much Eurocentric.
Thank you. Anybody want to respond to that? Go ahead.
Well, I don't want to respond. I just want to say, I want to piggyback and say something else to it. I think that the other thing we need to do, talking about, we are the change we seek. I think that we as, the group of people, like the middle-class Americans who are the consumers of early childhood education, that we need to advocate more for that workforce. So when we hear policymakers on the stage talking about childcare and why they want to invest in childcare, when we hear them talking about Head Start and why they think Head Start is important, we need to recognize that they're talking about something that is important to our lives and our children's lives. And we need to support those people, right? And we need to support them as they think about how to create a better structure and a better pipeline for all of these educators, because we have to start to, what is the saying? We have to start, I can't remember the saying, y'all, but we have to start, basically practicing what we preach, in the sense of we need to get behind those who are actually trying to make the policy change and vote for those people who are.
That part right there. Anything else to add, Kerry-Ann, around the workforce issue and try this out? Okay. All right. And there was a lot of we agree with you. And I think what you're both saying is, at the end of it, we have to activate, right? We are the change we seek, but we also have to push the leaders who have control of this, right? The fact that Tonia, you and Stacey have to go find money, that's not some people don't have time for that, right? That is, that's 80, probably 80 students you guys may have, but we have 100,000 in California, right? So it's also thinking about how we can't have now you Black women having to now do extra work, because the system basically extracts all of that, right? So I think we have to figure out, how do we do short term, but the long game is we can't just have people extract and then we go sort of backfill it, right? To me, it's we have to demand it early and stick to it in some ways. But again, this I don't want to turn into a workforce thing completely, but we do know that is an issue that we have to grapple with, that we're asking people to basically do something that they love and their passion. But if we're not paying for it, why should they suffer from that, right? So to really appreciate you all sort of thought and conversation about that. So now go into this a little bit. Now we have, summer 2020 had happened, and some of us are now in states in the Southeast in particular, where a whole lot has unraveled, right? Unraveled so expeditiously, right? From no more talking about Black people in Florida Georgia and Florida, I mean, Georgia and North Carolina over here where me and Tonia are at, you know, they don't dismantle anything that has a D, a E, or I. So, you know, if it got any of that, they're gonna like put it in the trash. So, but you know, and that impacts our teachers, our classrooms, our programs, us here. So, what are the biggest challenges or barriers you're seeing with implementing, whether you say culture responsive, whether you say anti-bias, whether you say anti-racist, whether you say anything that says whiteness is problematic, right? Or white supremacy. What do you see as the biggest challenges and barriers? And what would you say how we talk about in the book, or what you think needs to happen? So just who wants to kick it off? Kerry-Ann, you want to kick it off?
Yeah, sure.
I know you got some fire in here.
The revolutionary in me is just ready.
Yes, I know you're ready.
Okay, so the barriers and the challenges are both systemic and intrapersonal. I'll elaborate on the first point, and if I have time, I'll get to the other example. In the US and other contexts, racism and capitalism are inextricably linked. For instance, economic power, which is and was derived from colonization, slavery, racist policies, and the ill-gotten gains, translate into political power, social power, and cultural power. Nowhere is this more evident than the banning of books and the laws that have been passed to restrict teachings on race, racism, and anti-racism. Yet, viewed from a more optimistic standpoint, it signals an opportunity for us as a collective to enact the agency that flows through our veins and the resistance and the brilliance that characterize our histories. This can be done, for example, in community organizations creating that space for us to engage in anti-racist programming, as well as private programs that center the development of Black children's racial identity and pride and resistance and agency. Because you see, we have always fought back, and nothing's going to stop us now, right? Nothing. Even in our classrooms, we can challenge these practices. And I'll just speak from my own teaching experience. I've always used anti-racist pedagogy, much to the dismay of my students, and I've received backlash for that. But for me, the end goal in mind is the well-being of Black children. And I'm not going to defer to the comfort, which in essence is a form of white privilege, for white students, because in doing so, I'm reproducing the very same thing I hope to disrupt. In terms of intrapersonal barrier, we have teachers, and I'm sure some of them are on this call today, we have teachers who are interested in anti-racist work, in culturally responsive work, but they lack the institutional support, or they lack the skills and the training. So that requires more professional development for educators. On the other hand, we may have another group of educators who possess neither the inclination, disposition, or desire to challenge the status quo, to challenge racism. But this is why we need explicit anti-racist policies at the administrative level that utilizes NACI's principle of do no harm to ensure, to ensure that educators understand their legal and ethical responsibility to ensure that Black and racialized children do not experience the psychological harm of racist teaching practices and also silencing on race and racism.
Y'all heard that, right? Y'all heard
you see, I told you the revolutionary part of me was ready. I was just ready.
This is just the intro, y'all. But y'all gotta come to NAYC to see the rest of Kerry-Ann. Okay. I'm just giving you a plug in NAYC in November. Stephanie, you wanna add anything about what are the biggest challenges, to implementing, culturally responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist practices?
I don't think anything needs to be added. I think that was well said. We're gonna leave it just like that.
Just drop the mic on that one.
Perfect.
Okay.
Yes.
All right. we're gonna drop it and go to the next one. So, and I think actually, Kerry-Ann, to some point, I think some of what you said actually addresses this. So now let's talk a little bit brass tacks, right? So, especially we have a lot of educators or those who work with educators, and also, thinking about sort of the work each of you are doing, right? How would you advise a teacher to create a classroom, whether it's a classroom, a program, a home environment, like whatever environment, not just, it doesn't have to be like our traditional classroom, that adheres to like our culture responsive, anti-bias, anti-racist sort of approaches, especially on the anti-racism side. I agree with you that that's the part that is really, really hard for people to fully, really understand, right? So what tools can they use? Any particular trainings you may even advise them to consider? Like, what would you suggest? Tonia, you have any thoughts about this one, considering that's your...
Sure. So, in my mind, I am Beyonce in my mind.
Yes.
And so we all do, I think, talk like this because we can back it up. And so I think a part of this work is that we write about this because we are these things, right? So we are anti-racist, we are pro-Black, we are and have had success in teaching in a culturally responsive manner or doing assessment, so we are these things. And so if there is any advice I would give teachers is a critical part of this work is to first listen and be mentored for people who've actually had success doing it. Oftentimes you may pick up books and these people have not had any success at all with working with Black children or marginalized children, or even would be considered culturally responsive themselves. But the benefit you have is with our book, all of us have had, experience with this actual work and seeing how children and families and communities are thriving and programs are thriving. So the first advice I would give is to connect with the master teacher, a master leader in your area so you can see it, right? So it's important to see videos or to see it in action because it's really hard to actualize these practices. And so first you can actually recognize, oh my, that was a discriminatory racist practice, interaction, comment, nonverbal, response. And until you can actually see it and feel it, because it's also a spiritual thing as well, right? And so until you can actually feel it, then you can't see it and you can't do it. So it's very important for you to connect with those who have been doing this work, have been successful for this work, and who are master teachers in this work. So if there's any advice I would give, I would start there.
And in particular, I love that you sort of flagged a couple of things. One is sort of the nonverbal and also the spiritual, right? That I think a lot of times people think, what do I need to go buy? Mm-hmm. Where do I need to go like show that I am this, right? But part of learning it is that you have to sort of feel it in many ways. And you're going to see a lot of what we call either micro communications or even those kind of body communications, right? That does not require actual speech, right? Think about when your mama looked at you, there was a lot of conversation without her ever opening her mouth, right? So you have to be able to see it to fully live it. So I think your point about that and the spiritualness of it all, right? We think about what Kerry-Ann said earlier around agency, around resistance, right? Or we think about the way sort of faith-based and the church played a role in sort of civil rights liberation, et cetera. So again, it just makes me just a couple of those things sort of flag some of those thoughts.
Kerry-Ann and I were at the Early Childhood Critical Perspectives SIG this past ARA, and one of the emerging scholars that said something so profound that just has stuck with me. And she was kind of presenting on an African Center, summer program and just the ways in which it actualized cultural responsiveness and was so successful for kids. And so she said it really boils down to the children are the curriculum. And so that was so simplistic, where it's like, that's it. The children are the curriculum. And if the children are the curriculum, then we already know what to do because we're not looking everywhere. We're looking at the child. Please teach me. Please help me to create these joyful spaces for you. And I think if we keep it that simple and all the complexities that come around, then you're good.
You just have to see the kids. You actually have to first see
them.
You have to see it. Any other tools you all recommend or training or other things for teachers to create a sort of an environment that adheres to CRABAR?
We touched upon this in the book in terms of self-reflection, because it's absolutely critical to recognize that you as a person cannot necessarily be separated from you as the professional. The personal informs the professional. And what you create in your classroom in terms of the curriculum, as well as how you engage with students, it's coming from somewhere. So with that said, we cannot overestimate the importance of you taking time to engage in critical self-reflective practice. However, this is not to suggest that you start a reflection and you just stay there. You must use that data from that self-reflection to push you forward into a new realm of teaching and consciousness that would support your students, especially Black students, because we live in a society rife with anti-Blackness, to support Black students, whether that may be academically, emotionally, or socially. We're looking at the holistic well-being of children.
So I'll just piggyback on what she's saying in terms of self-reflection. I think that's what I was going to say. And I think it's very, very critical. I think that's where it starts. And when we think about the tools that are related for that, the books are the tool. That's why we are intentional about the way that all these things are organized in terms of the now what, the vignettes, etc. So use these things as a tool to guide self-reflection, as well. And I think the other thing to think about is also thinking about the environment, right? The environment that you create, taking a deep look at your environment and how are you creating a space that is welcoming and that is reflective of the children and the families that you're working with, and serving. And again, some of that we talk about too, across these various books. And Iheoma talked about, or no, one of the questions is about any particular training. And there is trainings. We have done webinars over and over and over again. You can Google it and get some of those, webinars. We also have with the Access tool, we have a partnership with Start Early where they are offering webinars as well about how to use the tool and the framework to think about your practices as well. So I think that there is training out there. There's a formal kind of training that Tonia is talking about when you are actually in a program, a degree granting program, but there's also in-service trainings out there as well for people to take advantage of. But I think it's just a matter of really not being afraid to do the work and taking advantage of those tools that are already out there and laid out for you in terms of how to help you do that reflective work.
Yeah, do the work, request some of these things. And really, as we sort of, at least I close up my time with you all, I want to sort of, there's a question in the chat, but also related to the last question really, which is, right, so, right, you'll ask them, do the training, do self-reflection, all of that. But we know that teachers want to do, like a lot of teachers, a lot of educators, a lot of, professionals want to do that. How do they do that in sort of the whole development appropriate practices sort of context, the whole mandated scripted curriculum that we're seeing sort of really pop up out there, that many educators have to do as part of like their state mandate or their federal mandated sort of standards. And so how do we both push, recognize, but also give hope, right? So going back to Kerry-Ann's sort of earlier point, right, about how do we also leave hope that even in the midst of all these sort of structures, let's put it that way, that are there, and maybe opportunities as well, how do we sort of continue to give hope, but also recognize that there are some of these sort of structural things that may make it challenging? Any thoughts about that?
Well, thank you, Iheoma, for your facilitation. I know you have to transition, so thanks so much for your transition. I keep evoking Asa Hilliard's name because a part of what I do, he was, of course, my mentor. And so I try to do Asa. I try to do Joyce King. I saw some references to Joyce King. And I think a part of the hope that I have, and one of the teachings that they both gave me is that don't get caught up in language, right? So they'll attack the language of equity. They'll attach diversity. They'll attack the language. Just do the work. if you have the will, do the work. So that brings me hope. So you can call it equity, you can call it joyful, you can call it whatever you call it. We're still going to do the work, and we're still going to do what we know is ethically responsible for children to create these joyful spaces. And so what brings me hope is that we can really get past all of the restrictions and the policies that are saying, don't say this, don't do that, because we have a will to do what's best for children. And so that's what gives me hope, is that we're savvy, we're strategic, and we are persistent in our ethical responsibility.
I would say what gives me hope is actually the workforce, because even though we are saying that there are, some people who are pushing up against this, not wanting this, I believe that there are more people who do. When I talk to educators, when I'm in classrooms, I get support, I get feedback from people that are saying that they do think that this is important. They do want to do this work. This is meaningful for them. So that gives me hope that all of us together, combined together, they can't stop us. We're going to keep moving. We're going to keep doing this work. So that's what gives me hope, are the educators themselves.
And what gives me hope is the tenacity of the human spirit. Even in the midst of opposition and persecution, we have always found ways to resist. And we have always found encouragement from our fellow brothers and sisters of the diaspora. So one of my dreams, one of my goals that I would love to see, not only in ECE, as well as larger society as pertains to Black people specifically, is that we are unified in such a way. We have that collectivist spirit, but we put it in action such that racist structures affecting our people are completely dismantled, and we receive our rightful inheritance. And I'm not only referring to the economic aspect, because yes, we deserve that too, but also, right, reparations, we deserve that too, but also the joy and the peace that come with living in a society that does not question our children's humanity.
All right. Okay. So with that, I think that was also another mic drop. We want to thank you all for your time, your work, your wisdom, and really remember that all of us hold the power to ensure racial justice, early childhood liberation agency, all of that. And so I'm going to pass this back to Emily, but really kudos to Tonia, to Stephanie, to Kerry-Ann. And really, I'm always just amazed and blessed and lucky to be part of this sisterhood that we continue to cultivate and move forward really for our people, our community, and of course, the workforce and children.
Thank you, Iheoma, and thanks to all of you for sharing your wisdom and your insights. I'm sorry to those of you whose questions we didn't get to, but it was a wonderful conversation. We value all of your time this afternoon, and thanks so much for being with us. Goodbye.